Whispering Pines remains. Years later, travelers still find their way to Alderwood. Not through maps. Not through signs. But through need. There's no website. No number to call. No advertisement. And yet, when the soul grows quiet enough, a path appears. And on that path, there waits a gate made of wood, and a bell that chimes like wine through pine. Inside, the inn still stands. The tea is warm. And someone always says, "You're welcome. Stay as long as you need." But only of this story. Alderwood lives on, in whispers, pages, and hearts that carry peace where it's needed most. In the stillness beyond the final page, Alderwood continues, carried in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the weightless hush of snowfall, in a song hummed softly on an empty road. It was never just a village. It was a moment, a pause, a gentle turning inward. And those who pass through it may one day forget the name, the faces, even the scent of pine in the air. But they will never forget how it felt to be truly held, without question or demand. Somewhere deep within them, a garden grows, quiet, patient, and rooted in peace. And that is how Alderwood lives on. Departures. Cass left first. She packed light, hugged tight, and left her sarcasm at the door. "I'm opening something," she told Elara. "Maybe a studio. Maybe just myself." Anna followed days later. Her sketchbooks were full now. She wanted to walk cities again, but this time slowly. With presence. Julian didn't say goodbye. He just left a note and a finished book on Elara's doorstep. "To the place that let me stop running. Thank you, Jay." Nora stayed a little longer, but her paintings began to show faraway horizons. She was almost ready. Silas? He stayed. Not because he needed to, because he chose to. And this time, he began teaching others how to listen for songs within silence. The last morning. It was snowing. Elara walked to the lake, alone. No guests. No voices. Just white, gentle stillness. She sat on the bench. Closed her eyes. She could feel them. All of them. Lila. Marin. Julian. Cass. Nora. Anna. Silas. The wind carried their echoes. And in that moment, Alderwood itself seemed to whisper. We remember. We hold. We continue. Elara stood, touched the old oak tree once more, and smiled through the quiet. A season ends. Winter crept in slowly, not as a threat, but as a soft hush, blanketing Alderwood with snow that made even the quiet quieter. The lake froze at the edges. The garden slept beneath the frost. Inside the inn, candles flickered, and voices lowered, not out of sadness, but reverence. Something sacred had happened here. Everyone felt it. Something was coming to a close. Elara's box. Elara sat alone one evening by the old hearth, a small wooden box in her lap. Inside were items left behind by those who had passed through Alderwood. A folded page from Marin's journal. A feather Julian had tucked inside his first return poem. A tiny clay moon made by Anna. A guitar pick engraved with Silas's initials. A piece of canvas with Cass's paint fingerprints. Each item pulsed with memory. With presence. She didn't cry. She smiled. They had come. They had stayed. And they had grown. That was enough. One last lantern night. They decided, together, to hold one final lantern night before winter deepened too far. Each person carved a message into their lantern. Cass's, I feel now. And I'm still here. Silas's, grief made space for music again. Anna's, I am lines and light, not noise. Julian's, I have returned. Nora's, the healer is healing still. Elara's, let this place remember even after we forget. They set the lanterns on the lake. They didn't drift far, only just enough. Just enough to let go. Cass returned to the garden every day. No one joined her. No one asked what she was doing. But Elara noticed tiny buds starting to appear. So did Julian, who quietly left her a small note one morning beside the soil. Even wild things grow better when they're not forced to bloom. Cass read it. Said nothing. But the next day, she added a small wooden sign to her patch. It read, "In progress. Back off." Anna laughed when she saw it. Perfect. The fire circle revisited. On the last night of the season, they gathered again. Silas sang. Julian passed out tokens with words carved into them. Trust, grace, return, pause. Nora unveiled a new painting called The Edge of Surrender. And Cass? Cass stood awkwardly, holding something behind her back. When it was her turn, she stepped forward and said, "I don't really do this whole sharing thing. But I made something." She held up a notebook, its cover rough, messy, painted in bold strokes. Inside were her thoughts. Unfiltered. Raw. Real. She placed it by the fire. Someone else might need it more than I do now. Then she sat down, quiet, calm, no jokes. Just there. Peace, interrupted, then reclaimed. Cass didn't leave the next day. She stayed. Because somewhere between the sarcasm, silence, and soil, something had broken open. And in that break, she didn't find pain. She found breath. She found space. She found herself. A crack in the armor. Cass didn't want to participate. But somehow, she always showed up. When Anna painted in the clearing, Cass would sit nearby, pretending not to watch. When Nora lit candles in the windows at dusk, Cass would light one too, grudgingly. When Julian left hand-carved wooden tokens on each doorstep, Cass found hers and stared at it for a long time. It was shaped like a compass. She didn't ask what it meant. But she didn't throw it away either. The wall and the garden. One afternoon, Elara found Cass throwing rocks into the lake. Hard. Over and over. "Trouble finding peace?" she asked gently. Cass exhaled sharply. "I don't want peace. Peace is where you feel things. And that scares you?" Cass turned. Her eyes were glassy. "I'm tired of feeling. I spent the last year trying not to." Elara walked beside her and handed her a trowel. "Then dig. You don't have to feel. Just plant something." Cass stared at it. "What am I planting?" "Whatever you're not ready to name." The one who didn't believe. She arrived with the wind, sharp boots, a leather backpack, and a look that could cut through fog. Her name was Cass. She didn't come for healing. She came because someone made her. "A friend sent me," she said flatly at the inn's threshold. "Said I needed a reset? Honestly, this place looks like a retirement brochure." Elara smiled in that calm, unreadable way. "Sometimes what we mock is exactly what we fear we might need." Cass blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Only that the tea's warm. If you want it." Cass hesitated, then walked in. Sparks against stillness. Cass was unlike anyone Alderwood had seen in a while. She questioned everything. "Why do you all speak so quietly? Why is there no Wi-Fi? Do you all just paint and cry here?" She was sarcastic, restless, loud. And yet, no one pushed her away. Anna gave her space. Nora offered her a blank canvas. Silas didn't speak. He just handed her a set of worn headphones and walked away. That night, she sat alone by the lake, pulled the headphones over her ears, and hit play. Silas's voice filled her with something raw and old, and soft. She sat there until morning. The evening of shared words. On a cold, clear night, the fire circle was warm again. Lanterns glowed in the trees, and the lake reflected the stars. Julian sat among them, quiet as always. Then Silas handed him a sheet of paper and said softly, "Read it or just hold it. Either is fine." Julian unfolded it. On the page were simple lyrics, a lullaby Silas had written, unfinished. Julian read. Then, quietly, brokenly, he sang. Only a few lines. But everyone froze. And then the circle leaned in. Anna drew the moment without looking at her page. Nora let a tear fall into her tea. Elara simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Welcome back. New roots." Julian never became talkative, but he became present. He helped mend the old trail steps with Silas. He taught Anna how to bind her sketches into handmade books. He built Nora a shelf for her growing gallery of abstract canvases. He also started writing again. Tiny observations. Glimpses of the world he'd lost and found again. He didn't share them. Not yet. But Alara once passed his window and saw the pages lit by candlelight. Healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply continues. The man who didn't speak. He arrived just after sunset. Tall, thin, maybe in his early 40s. A wool coat pulled tight against the chill. No suitcase. No name offered. When Alara greeted him, he only nodded. "Would you like a room?" she asked gently. A pause. Then another nod. The others noticed him in the following days, sitting near the lake, staring into the trees, always alone. He didn't join the meals. He didn't speak. Anna started calling him the quiet man in her sketches. Silas, watching from a distance, murmured, "He's not lost. He's afraid of being found." A cup left waiting. One morning, Alara left a cup of tea outside the man's door. A small note beside it read, "You don't have to speak. You just have to stay." The next morning, the cup was returned. Empty. Washed. The third morning, the tea was gone before she even knocked. On the fifth day, he left a note in return. "I don't remember how to be in the world." Alara smiled to herself. He had spoken, his way. Fractures and threads. The man's name, they would learn much later, was Julian. He had once been a professor, a writer, a mentor. But one winter years ago, his partner died suddenly. The grief had turned the world's volume down to silence. Julian hadn't spoken since, not out loud, not even to himself. But in Alderwood, something was shifting. He walked the lake trail with Silas. He watched Nora paint in silence, then began carving small wooden shapes beside her. He sat with Anna as she sketched, once reaching over to adjust a line she was drawing. Little by little, he was with them. The hearth opens wider. And so, Alderwood opened its arms again. More guests arrived, quiet people with quiet pain. An old woman who hadn't spoken to her children in years. A young man with ink-stained hands and a novel he could no longer finish. A mother who had lost her way not just in motherhood, but in herself. And the circle around the fire grew wider. Silas sang. Anna drew again. Nora painted swirls of frost and fire together. And Alara simply held space. The village, though touched by the cold, felt warmer than ever. The fire rekindled. It was Nora who finally stood. She took a piece of firewood and added it to the fading fire. "We've all been through our own winters," she said. "This is just another one. We know how to wait. We know how to plant again." Her voice was quiet but steady. Anna looked up. "But what if it doesn't come back?" "It always does," Alara answered, almost in a whisper. "The peace we find here isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the promise that we're not alone in it." Silas closed his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, he sang, not a song of grief, but one of endurance. Letters returned. A week later, a bundle of letters arrived in Alara's mailbox. Dozens of them. Marin had written again, but this time she'd shared Alderwood's name with others, strangers who had only heard whispers of healing and rest. The letters were full of longing. "I don't know what I'm looking for, but I think it might be here. Can a place really hold this much quiet? Do you still let people come, even if they've forgotten how to ask for help?" Alara read each one carefully. Then she turned to the group and smiled. "It's time," she said. The early frost. Autumn in Alderwood was usually gentle, a soft slipping away of color into quiet. But this year, the frost came early. One morning, the village woke to a silver sheet of ice over the lake. The flowers Silas and Anna had tended now bowed under delicate crystals. The air was still, but not calm. There was a kind of tension in it, like breath held too long. Elara stood on the porch of the inn, shawl tight around her shoulders. She could feel it, too. Change. It wasn't just the weather. A storm in the quiet. It began with small things. Silas's music grew more somber. His fingers hesitated on the strings. Anna stopped sketching. Her pages remained blank. Nora's eyes grew distant, like she was no longer here, but somewhere else entirely, thinking about things no one dared name. Even Elara felt it, a tiredness in her bones she hadn't known before. One evening, a storm rolled in, not wind or rain, but something quieter and heavier, a deep, shared silence. They gathered at the inn by the hearth. No one spoke for a long time, until Silas finally whispered, "What if all this stillness was just borrowed?" The arrival of Nora. Late one rainy afternoon, a new visitor arrived. Her name was Nora, mid-30s, wrapped in a faded yellow coat, and holding nothing but a canvas satchel. She walked into the village slowly, as if each step took effort. Elara met her under the inn's awning. "I don't know why I came here," Nora said. "Only that I couldn't stay where I was." "That's enough," Elara said. "Come inside. Rest first. The understanding will come later." A place without masks? Nora was a counselor by trade, someone who helped others for years while forgetting to listen to herself. "I used to think I needed to be strong all the time," she confessed to Anna one day. "But I don't think that's strength anymore." Anna nodded. "Maybe strength is letting yourself be soft, too." Nora started painting in the afternoons. Not portraits, but abstracts, color swirls of emotion, full of movement and stillness all at once. She called her first canvas, "The Quiet That Speaks Back." Gathering at the edge of autumn. As the season turned and the leaves began to fall, the villagers gathered once more. They lit lanterns and placed them around the lake, their lights dancing on the water. Each person placed something into the lake: letters, petals, sketches, poems, tokens of what they had released and what they had found. Silas sang a lullaby. Anna held Nora's hand. Elara watched the lanterns drift, feeling the pulse of the village like a living heartbeat. Alderwood wasn't just a place anymore. It was a way of being. Letters on the wind. After Marin left Alderwood, a soft kind of stillness returned to the village. But the silence was different now, richer somehow, fuller with memory. One morning, Elara received a letter. It arrived tied with twine, smelling faintly of rosemary and sunlight. "Dear Elara, I've been planting the seeds you gave me. In parks, roadside fields, even cracks in the sidewalks. Sometimes I think of the way the lake looked at dusk, or how the wind seemed to answer the questions I never dared to ask aloud. I've met people who need quiet like I did, and though I can't offer them Alderwood, I tried to offer a pause, a breath, a beginning. Thank you for helping me come back to life. With love, Marin." Elara closed her eyes and pressed the letter to her heart. The lake didn't just heal, it echoed. Silas's evening song. Silas had grown into a steady presence in the village. Most evenings, he sat near the water with his guitar, playing not for a crowd, but for the trees, for the lake, for himself. He began composing new music, soft lullabies born of quiet mornings and starlit paths. One night, Anna sat beside him and asked, "Do you ever miss the stage?" Silas thought for a long while, then replied, "The world out there clapped for the noise. But here, the silence listens." Anna smiled. "That's beautiful. So is this," he said, glancing at her sketchbook. They shared a moment of unspoken peace, the kind that doesn't demand anything but presence. Anna's gift. Anna had been sketching tirelessly, filling her pages with images of Alderwood's quiet beauty. One day, she invited Marin and Elara to a small exhibition in the village hall. Her drawings told stories of loss and healing, of storms passing and new light breaking through. The villagers came, captivated by the gentle honesty in her art. Marin whispered, "You've captured the soul of this place, and of all of us." Anna blushed. "I think this village has captured me, too." The gathering of stories. As summer approached, Alara proposed a gathering, a night to share stories, songs, and art beneath the stars. Silas sang his haunting melodies. Anna's sketches were displayed by candlelight. Maren read a letter she had written, a testament to the power of remembering and letting go. The villagers listened, laughed, cried, a community woven together by their shared journeys. Alara looked around and whispered, "This is what Alderwood is, a sanctuary of hearts. New seeds, new beginnings." Spring had long passed, and the wildflowers planted by Silas and others bloomed brilliantly. The village felt alive in a way that was both peaceful and vibrant. Maren packed a small bag, preparing to leave Alderwood, not as a farewell, but as a promise to carry the peace she'd found into the wider world. Alara handed her a small packet of wildflower seeds. "Plant these wherever you go," she said softly. "Let the calm grow beyond these hills." Maren smiled through tears. "I will." The quiet storm. Though peace had settled over the village, not every day was easy. Silas had moments when the weight of his past pressed down, threatening to drown him again. Anna sometimes felt the old restlessness claw at her mind, the urge to run back to the chaos she'd fled. But here, with Alara, Maren, and each other, they learned to hold space for those storms, to weather them with quiet strength. One evening, as rain pattered on the inn's windows, they gathered together, sharing stories, music, and sketches. In their shared silence, they found a new kind of peace. Silas's quiet confession. One late afternoon, Silas found himself walking along the lake's edge, the water shimmering softly in the golden light. He carried with him an old, worn journal, a relic from a past life. Alara found him there, sitting on a weathered bench, staring at the ripples. "Would you like to talk?" she asked gently. Silas hesitated, then opened the journal. Inside were lyrics, poems, and letters he'd never sent, fragments of his soul laid bare. "I used to believe my voice was only for the stage," he said softly. "But here, I think I'm learning that it can be just for me, and for those who need to hear." Alara nodded. "The lake hears us all. Sometimes it even answers back." Silas smiled, a real smile. "Then maybe it's time I listen." Chapter 17. Anna's Sketches. Anna spent her days roaming the village with her sketchbook, capturing scenes that seemed to pulse with life. The old stone bridge arching over the creek, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the flickering lanterns that lit the cobblestone streets at dusk. One afternoon, Alara found Anna sitting beneath the willow tree, her sketchbook open on her lap. "What are you drawing?" Alara asked. Anna smiled shyly. "The lake. But it's more than the water. It's the way it holds everything, the sky, the trees, the memories." Alara nodded. "That's the magic of Alderwood. It holds us, even when we feel like we might fall apart." Anna looked up, her eyes bright. "I think I'm starting to feel whole again." Chapter 18. Crossing Paths. One misty morning, Silas and Anna met by the garden. Silas was planting a wildflower seedling, dirt under his fingernails. Anna was sketching the buds of a nearby tree. They smiled at each other, strangers yet somehow familiar. "Would you like to help me plant?" Silas asked. Anna nodded eagerly. Together, they worked quietly, the sound of shovels digging and gentle laughter mixing with birdsong. It was the beginning of a new friendship, a thread woven into the tapestry of Alderwood's calm. The stranger's secret. Another visitor arrived in the village, a young woman named Anna. In her 20s, Anna carried a sketchbook filled with hurried lines and unfinished drawings. She had escaped the city's chaos, hoping to find quiet and clarity in Alderwood. Alara welcomed her warmly, and soon Anna began to capture the village's peaceful essence in her art. Maren said to her, "Sometimes pictures speak louder than words." And as the days passed, Anna found her restless mind slowly calming, her sketches becoming softer and more certain. Silas's song. Days passed as Silas settled into the rhythm of the village. Each morning, he wandered the woods, letting the quiet wrap around him like a soft cloak. One evening, under a blanket of stars, the villagers gathered around a fire near the lake. Silas was invited to sing again. He hesitated, memories of applause and empty seats swirling in his mind. But then he looked at the faces around him, warm, patient, kind, and he began. His voice rose like a gentle tide, carrying stories of loss, longing, and hope. Marin's eyes shimmered with tears, Elara smiled softly, and even the old oak trees seemed to lean closer, listening. When Silas finished, the silence that followed was not empty, it was full. Full of gratitude, full of healing. Silas carried a secret. He had once been a singer. A voice that had filled concert halls with haunting melodies. Though he hadn't sung in many years, his talent hadn't faded. One evening, after a community gathering in the village square, Silas stood quietly beside the fire and began to sing. His voice was soft but filled with raw emotion, the kind that reaches deep inside and stirs something forgotten. Marin, sitting nearby, whispered to Elara, "Sometimes words aren't enough. We just need to be heard." Silas carried a secret. He had once been a singer. A voice that had filled concert halls with haunting melodies. Though he hadn't sung in many years, his talent hadn't faded. One evening, after a community gathering in the village square, Silas stood quietly beside the fire and began to sing. His voice was soft but filled with raw emotion, the kind that reaches deep inside and stirs something forgotten. Marin, sitting nearby, whispered to Elara, "Sometimes words aren't enough. We just need to be heard." Lila's garden. One afternoon, Silas wandered to the herb garden where Elara tended to the wildflowers, the same flowers Lila had once loved. He knelt beside a patch of bright blossoms and asked, "What is it about this place that feels so alive?" Elara smiled and said, "Here everyone tends to their own garden, healing through memories, pain, and hope. Sometimes, the most beautiful flowers grow in the most unexpected soil." Silas reached out his hand. "Then maybe I can help you plant mine." The arrival of Silas. As spring gently began to fade in Alderwood, a solitary figure made his way through the village's quiet streets. His name was Silas. A man in his 50s, with streaks of silver in his dark hair and eyes that held both weariness and deep sorrow. For years, he had lived in the city, carrying a heavy heart and a silence that grew louder than any noise around him. Silas had lost his family in a way that left him hollow, retreating into himself, searching for a place to breathe. And as he stepped through Alderwood's wooden gate, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a whisper of hope. This might be the place. Meeting by the hearth. Silas found himself in the village's small cafe, where the warm scent of herbs and fresh bread mingled with quiet laughter. Behind the counter was Elara. A song for the silent. Silas carried a secret. He had once been a singer. A voice that had filled concert halls with haunting melodies. Though he hadn't sung in many years, his talent hadn't faded. One evening, after a community gathering in the village square, Silas stood quietly beside the fire and began to sing. His voice was soft but filled with raw emotion, the kind that reaches deep inside and stirs something forgotten. Marin, sitting nearby, whispered to Elara, "Sometimes words aren't enough. We just need to be heard." She greeted him with a gentle smile. "Welcome to Alderwood," she said softly. "This is a place where many lost souls find a bit of peace." Silas looked up from his coffee, voice low and rough. "I'm just looking for a breath, a moment to be." Elara nodded. "You've come to the right place. The trees here speak in whispers, and the wind teaches us how to listen." For the first time in years, Silas felt the tightness in his chest loosen, just a little. The farewell and the seed. At dawn, Elara and Marin stood by the willow. Neither said much. They embraced quietly, a knowing hug that said more than words ever could. Before leaving, Marin pressed a tiny paper packet into Elara's hand. "What's this?" Elara asked. "Wildflower seeds," Marin said. "From the glen where the fox led me. I think the lake would like more color." And with that, she left. Elara stood for a moment longer, the breeze lifting the edge of her shawl. She looked out at the lake, then down at the seeds in her hand. Yes, she thought. The garden always grows again. A new letter. Back at the inn that night, Marin sat by candlelight and wrote a letter, not to the past, not to Lila. To someone else. Dear Elara, I thought I came here because I was lost. But now I think I came because something inside me still believed in healing. I've remembered more than my grief. I've remembered who I am beneath it. Thank you for listening without asking. Thank you for letting silence be enough. Tomorrow, I think I'll leave, not because I need to escape, but because I want to bring this peace with me. There are people out there who haven't yet found their lake. Maybe I can be part of it for them. Marin. The fox returns. It was nearly dusk when Marin saw it, fire red first slipping through the trees. She froze. Elara, she whispered. It's here. The fox stood at the edge of the clearing by the willow. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched. Don't be afraid, Elara said softly. I'm not, Marin replied, surprising herself. The fox turned and walked away slowly, but not as if fleeing. More like inviting. Marin followed. They wound through the trees until they reached a small glen she had never seen before. In the center stood a stone circle, 12 perfectly smooth, moss-covered stones surrounding a shallow pool of water. The fox circled once, then vanished into the trees. Marin stepped forward. The water was so still, it looked solid. But when she knelt and peered into it, she didn't see her reflection. She saw Lila. Smiling. Spinning barefoot in the rain. Arms wide to the sky. Marin wept. Not out of grief, but out of joy. She finally remembered her hole. The garden grows again. Back at the inn, Elara was tending to the herb garden. She looked up as Marin approached and smiled. Want to help me replant the chamomile? Marin nodded. I'd like that. They worked in silence at first, hands in the cool soil, the scent of earth and mint rising with the breeze. Then Marin asked, How did you know I'd come? Elara brushed dirt from her hands. I didn't. But I hoped. I always hope. That someone who needs this place will find it. Marin looked around, the garden, the hills, the path to the lake. Do you think everyone has a place like this, waiting? Elara shook her head slowly. I think the place isn't always physical. Sometimes it's a person. Or a poem. Or a moment. What matters is that it feels like home. Marin smiled. Then maybe this isn't just a place. Maybe it's a reminder. Threads of light. Marin had begun walking the village paths each morning just after dawn. There was something in the early light, gentle, forgiving, that made it easier to breathe. The pain wasn't gone. But now it had room to stretch, to soften. She visited the willow daily. Sometimes Elara joined her, sometimes not. But the silence between them never felt empty. It was a space where truth could bloom, slowly. One morning, she found a small envelope tucked into a crook of the willow tree. Inside was a folded piece of paper. On it, just a single question. What would you say to her now, if she were here? Marin's breath caught. It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a signature. The question had come from the lake. From the trees. From the part of herself that was finally ready to speak. She sat and wrote. I miss you. I'm sorry I stopped dancing. I'm sorry I made myself so small after you left. You always said joy was louder than sorrow. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I'm just remembering now. I love you. I never stopped. And I won't stop living, not anymore, not just for me, but for you too. She folded the letter and placed it in the water. It floated for a moment, then slowly drifted away. The lake's voice. That evening, Marin returned to the willow tree. The lake was glowing under the light of the setting sun, and the breeze carried the scent of wet pine and wild mint. She sat on the blanket Elara had left there, closed her eyes, and whispered, Lila. The name tasted like both pain and honey. And then, the lake responded. Not with words. Not even with sound. But with feeling. The wind shifted. The air pulsed. A ripple moved across the still water, as if the lake had drawn a breath. Marin opened her eyes. On the water's edge, another stone. This one bore no symbol, only a word. Remember. She picked it up, pressed it to her heart, and for the first time, she smiled through her tears. It had taken Marin's voice. Not literally, but she had stopped speaking for weeks. When she did speak again, it was careful, measured, surface level. Grief had built walls, thick ones. And now, here, under this ancient ash tree, the walls began to crumble. She sobbed. Not delicate tears, not cinematic weeping. Raw, shaking, guttural sobs. The kind that cleanse. The kind that break open the hidden places. The kind that heal. When she returned to the inn, Elara didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She handed Marin a mug of warm nettle tea, gently squeezed her shoulder, and sat beside her on the porch swing as the rain began to fall in slow, silver lines. They watched the sky together. Quietly. Peacefully. The memory beneath the ash tree. Marin woke before sunrise, her dreams still clinging to the edges of her thoughts like fog on the lake. She sat up in bed, heart racing, her breath shallow. The dream had been vivid, too vivid. She was back in a hospital room. White walls. A beeping monitor. A voice, her mother's, saying, "She doesn't talk much anymore." And the weight of silence pressing down on her chest like a stone. She had been 15 when it happened. The accident. Her sister. The endless silence that followed. Marin didn't cry anymore. She hadn't in years. But now, here in Alderwood, something was cracking. She needed to move. To breathe. To walk. She dressed quickly, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the dawn. She didn't go to the lake that morning. Her feet took her elsewhere, up the winding path behind the inn, through the thinning woods, until she reached a clearing with a single, tall ash tree in the center. Its bark was pale and scarred by time. Its branches reached not upward but outward, like arms trying to embrace the sky. At the base of the tree sat a stone. It hadn't been there before. This one bore a simple symbol, a broken circle. Marin knelt, picking it up with trembling fingers. And then, for the first time in years, she let the memory come. Her sister, Lila, had been only 12. A laugh like wind chimes. A love of dancing in the rain. The car crash had taken her in an instant. But it had taken more than that. Chapter 3: A Trail of Stones. The next morning, Marin returned to the lake alone. Elara watched from the inn window as the younger woman hesitated at the willow's edge, then stepped forward. She was beginning. When Marin returned later that afternoon, her eyes were red but her steps steadier. "I found something," she said, holding out her palm. And it was a smooth, round stone with a feather drawn in delicate white ink. Elara smiled. "The lake is speaking." Marin furrowed her brow. "Why a feather? What does it make you feel?" Elara asked. Marin thought for a long moment. "Lightness. But also fragility." Elara nodded. "That's a beginning." In the days that followed, Marin found more stones. One with a flame. Another with a wave. One with a single, open eye. Each one left under a tree, or beside her chair by the lake, or tucked near the garden path. No one saw who placed them. But they always appeared when she needed them. And slowly, she began to change. She smiled at Callie in the flower shop. She helped June with tea in the mornings. One evening, she even painted beside Jonah under the willow. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "That's okay," Jonah replied. "The lake never asks for perfection. Only honesty." "Elara?" A nod. They stood in silence for a beat, and then Elara offered a smile. "Welcome to Alderwood." Marin said nothing, but she didn't turn away. Later, they sat beneath the willow. Marin sipped the tea slowly, unsure. "This place is too quiet," she finally said. "It's like the silence is staring at me." Elara nodded. "It does that at first. But it's not staring. It's listening." Marin frowned, then looked out at the lake. "I don't know what I expected. I guess I thought I'd get off the bus and feel better." "You got off the bus," Elara said gently. That's enough for now." They sat for a long time, saying little. Marin stared at the water as if hoping it would speak. Elara didn't press. She knew that healing didn't come through forcing, it came through space. Through waiting. Through witnessing. When the moon reached its peak, the breeze picked up, and the willow's branches swayed above them. And then Elara heard it. So soft, so low, like a sigh between the trees. The hum. But it wasn't calling to her this time. Marin sat up straighter. "Did you hear that?" she asked, startled. Elara nodded slowly. "Yes. I think the lake has something to show you." "Dear Marin, Alderwood is real. The lake is real. And so is the path that brought you to this moment. I don't know your story yet, but I know the feeling behind your words. If you'd like to find your way to Alderwood, or somewhere like it, I would be honored to walk a little of the path with you. If you're ready, meet me in Alderwood on the first full moon of next month. I'll be waiting under the willow tree. With care. Elara." The girl who arrived in shadows. The full moon rose clear and pale over Alderwood, casting silver light across the lake's still surface. The village had changed little since Elara last stood under the weeping willow, but she had. Now she was no longer seeking silence for herself, but holding it open for others. She arrived early, her blanket already laid beneath the tree, a thermos of herbal tea beside her. The fox hadn't visited in some time, but she had the feeling it would return tonight. At dusk she saw her. Marin stepped off the same old bus Elara once had. She wore a heavy coat despite the mild air and carried a worn leather bag that looked too full for a short stay. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes scanning the village with guarded curiosity. Elara rose and walked toward her. "Marin?" she said gently. The young woman turned. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of someone much older. Part 2. Chapter 1. The Letter from Marin. It had been nearly a year since Elara left Alderwood. She now lived in a small cottage by a lake not unlike the one she had first fallen in love with. Time moved gently here too, though the birds sang different songs and the forest had a different scent, more cedar than pine, more wild rose than lavender. Her days were filled with writing, tending a modest herb garden, and the occasional letter exchange with June, Jonah, and Callie. She still kept the painted stone that said "Begin" by her window. Every time she passed it, she smiled, reminded of the truth she had discovered: peace isn't a place, it's a choice. Then, one morning in early autumn, a letter arrived. It was hand-addressed in a looping, unsure script. Inside, the paper trembled slightly, as though written in hesitation. "Dear Elara, you don't know me. My name is Marin, and I found your book by accident in a second-hand shop 2 towns over. I don't know why I bought it, I don't read much anymore. But something about the title pulled me in. I don't know how to say this, but your words felt like they were meant for me. Like they were waiting. I haven't been okay. Not for a long time. And after reading your story, I wondered, is Alderwood real? Is the lake real? If it is, if you are, please tell me. I don't need answers. Just direction. Marin." Elara sat still for a long time after reading the letter. She remembered that feeling. That ache. That quiet plea that lived beneath questions. She had written that book as a way of releasing her own story into the world, not expecting it to become a map for someone else. But now it had. She picked up her pen. Chapter 10. One Last Stone. That evening, Elara returned to the clearing with the old pine tree. The same small bench waited, warm from the late sunlight. She sat, listening to the familiar hum in the earth, the breeze weaving through the needles above. It felt like saying goodbye, not to a place, but to who she had been before. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. Inside were all the stones she had found: the spiral, the fern, the star, the moon, the wave. Symbols of a path she hadn't known she was walking until now. She placed each stone at the base of the pine tree, one by one, like offerings or thank yous. And then, with a steady hand, she added her own. It was a smooth pebble from the lake's edge, now painted with a single, simple word: begin. She stood, smiled softly at the tree, and walked back through the woods as the sky turned gold behind her. Epilogue: a letter from Alderwood. Months later, in a quiet town by another lake far away, a small bookstore received a package. It contained a slender book titled The Whispering Pines by E.T. Linden. Inside were stories of healing forests, lakes that listened, foxes that watched over travelers, and women who remembered who they truly were. At the front of the book was a handwritten dedication. To those who feel lost. Sometimes the path finds you. All you have to do is listen. And somewhere, tucked between pages or memories or dreams, the lake kept whispering, gentle as ever, eternal as the stars reflected in its water. The end. Chapter 9: The Reflection in the Water. A few more weeks passed in Alderwood, and spring began leaning gently into early summer. The days grew longer, the forest greener, the lake clearer. Elara had stopped measuring her time in days altogether. Instead, she moved with the rhythm of bird song and breeze, of tea brewing in the kitchen, of laughter from the flower shop down the road. One morning, she stood by the lake just after sunrise, barefoot in the dew-damp grass. The surface of the water was so still, so clear, she could see her reflection perfectly. But it wasn't the reflection she had seen when she first arrived: tired eyes, guarded posture, worn smile. Now she looked alive. She knelt down, touching the edge of the lake. Cool ripples spread out under her fingertips. "I'm ready," she said softly, unsure if she meant it for the water, the trees, or herself. The breeze shifted. The weeping willow behind her rustled, and for a moment the sound was more than leaves, it was voices. Layered, gentle, familiar. "You have listened. You have learned. Now you may return." Elara closed her eyes, and a vivid memory surfaced, not painful now, but soft and glowing. She was a child, sitting beside her mother at the piano, their fingers moving together across the keys. Her mother's voice sang a lullaby, and her father hummed along from the kitchen. A moment she had buried long ago out of fear that remembering would break her. But here, it healed her instead. The water shimmered, and in its ripples she saw other reflections: Callie arranging flowers, Jonah painting beneath the willow, June lighting a candle at the inn window. This place had become a part of her. She stood, heart calm and full. But she folded the letter and placed it under a stone on the windowsill. It could wait. That afternoon, as she walked by the lake, she saw the fox again. This time, it was standing on the path, just a few feet ahead. It didn't run. It watched her. Elara met its gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. The fox blinked slowly, turned, and slipped into the trees. And just like that, she knew. Her time in Alderwood wasn't over. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while. She walked back to the inn with her heart full and her steps steady. In the garden, June was watering the herbs. "Staying a little longer?" she asked with a smile. Elara nodded. "I think I've only just arrived." She stayed there for a long time. When she finally stood to leave, she found something tucked into a knot at the base of the tree, a small folded piece of paper, sealed with a pressed violet. Elara opened it carefully. "You are the silence you seek. You are the voice you lost. You are the light returning. The pines." She pressed the paper to her heart and smiled. Chapter 8: Homecoming. The next few days felt different, lighter, brighter, even as clouds gathered in the sky. Elara moved through the village with a new ease, as though she had remembered a language long forgotten. The locals noticed too. "You've got that look," Callie said with a knowing grin, handing Elara a bouquet of lavender and wild chamomile. "What look?" "The one people get when they finally hear what the lake is saying." Even Jonah commented on it as they painted together beneath the willow. "You're not trying so hard anymore," he said. "That's when the real colors show." Elara laughed. "I think I was holding my breath for years. I finally let it go." Each evening, she wrote in her journal, not just reflections, but stories. Real ones. Stories of women who wandered into forgotten forests and came out carrying pieces of the stars. Stories of foxes who whispered wisdom and lakes that remembered lost names. They weren't just fiction. They were truths wrapped in magic. One morning, Elara received a letter. This time, from the city. An offer to return to her old job. More money, more prestige, more pressure. For a moment, the thought of her old life tugged at her, like a familiar rhythm playing in the background. Chapter 7: The Song of the Pines. After the lantern walk, something in Elara shifted. It was subtle, like a door left slightly ajar, letting in air she hadn't realized she needed. The next morning, she woke early and walked to the forest trail beyond the lake, deeper than she'd ever gone before. Mist clung to the pine needles, and the forest floor was soft beneath her boots. The stillness wasn't silence, it was music in its purest form. The trees whispered, not in words, but in feelings, "You are safe here. You are not alone." As she wandered, she stumbled upon a clearing she hadn't seen before. In the center stood a single, tall pine tree, much older than the others, its bark gnarled with time, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms in prayer. At its base sat a small wooden bench, carved with worn symbols she didn't recognize. Without thinking, Elara sat. The forest surrounded her like a cathedral, green and glowing in the early morning light. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. And then she heard it. It was faint, barely there. A hum deep and low, like the earth itself exhaling. It seemed to come from the pine tree, from the air, from inside her. A vibration more than a sound. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from recognition. This was the song Jonah had spoken of. The voice of the lake. Of the pines. Of the earth. And somehow, of her own soul. "That you're not lost," he said. "You're just remembering the way back." Chapter 6: The Lantern Walk. The villagers of Alderwood had a tradition, one that Elara hadn't known about until June mentioned it over breakfast. "Every spring, on the first full moon after the blossoms bloom, we walk to the lake at dusk," she explained. "It's called the Lantern Walk. We light candles, float them on the water, and send our hopes, fears, or memories out into the night." That evening, the inn was quiet with reverence. June handed Elara a small paper lantern and a candle, along with a piece of parchment. "Write down something you're ready to release," she said gently. "The lake will carry it for you." Elara sat in her room with the paper in front of her, unsure what to write. There were so many things, so many heavy memories, so many hidden wounds. But when her hand finally moved, it did so without hesitation. "I forgive myself for staying silent when I should have spoken. I forgive myself for leaving when I needed to stay." She folded the note and tucked it into the lantern. As the sun dipped below the hills, she joined the quiet procession of townsfolk walking down the path, their lanterns glowing softly in the dim light. The weeping willows swayed gently in the breeze, and the lake sparkled like glass dusted with gold. One by one, lanterns were placed on the water and released. They drifted like stars across the lake, each one carrying a whisper into the night. Elara stepped to the edge, placed her lantern on the surface, and let it go. She watched as it bobbed gently, joining the others in a slow, luminous dance. She felt her breath catch, something inside her loosening, then floating free. And for the first time since arriving in Alderwood, she cried. Not from sadness. Not from regret. From release. Beneath the willow's silent cry, where shadows touch the sunlit sky, there lies a name you've tried to lose. A path once feared, you now must choose. Elara read the lines again and again. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but recognition. She knew the words weren't random. Something inside her responded to them, as if her soul had been waiting for the message. She walked to the willow the next morning, before the sun had fully risen. The lake was still and mirrored the world so perfectly that it felt like standing on the edge of another realm. She sat in her usual spot and closed her eyes. Memories surfaced, bits and pieces she had tried not to think about. Her father's laugh, warm and distant. The piano she used to play as a girl, before anxiety silenced her fingers. The small house on a hill where her mother once read her stories during thunderstorms. She hadn't thought of them in years. Elara had run from the pain, buried it beneath busy schedules and short-lived relationships. But Alderwood, this quiet place, this sacred lake, was peeling away the layers she had so carefully built around her heart. Later that day, Jonah approached her with a soft smile. "You're hearing it now, aren't you?" Elara looked up. "Hearing what?" The hum beneath the silence. The lake's voice. "It speaks when we stop trying to fill the quiet." She hesitated. "And what is it saying?" "You're not the first the lake has spoken to," he said. "And you won't be the last." Elara kept the stones in a small wooden box she found in the inn's attic. Each one felt like a breadcrumb, leading her somewhere unknown but meaningful. That night, as rain tapped softly against the roof, she dreamed of standing in the lake itself. Water rose around her ankles, knees, waist, but she wasn't afraid. Beneath the surface, glowing stones lit a path toward the center of the lake. She followed. When she awoke, she wasn't sure what the dream meant. But she felt lighter, as if something old had loosened its grip on her chest. Chapter 5: Echoes Beneath the Water. The days grew longer, and the lake shimmered under the deepening warmth of spring. Birds nested along the shore, and the weeping willow began to bloom, its branches adorned with tiny pale blossoms that danced with the wind. Elara had started to feel not just rested, but rooted. For the first time in years, she wasn't counting the days or checking her phone for the next task. She had stopped measuring time by appointments or deadlines. Instead, she counted the color of the sky, the ripples in the lake, the number of petals fallen on her blanket each morning. But despite the calm, something stirred in her, an old memory, blurry at the edges, like trying to recall a dream that slipped away upon waking. One evening, she returned to her room at the inn to find a letter on her pillow. There was no name, only her own initials written on the envelope, E.T. Inside was a single sheet of parchment with a poem, handwritten in dark blue ink. Chapter 3: Beneath the Willow. Elara began to fall into a rhythm, as though her life had shifted into a slower, more deliberate beat. Mornings started with herbal tea and quiet pages in her journal. Afternoons often meant slow walks through the forest path behind the inn, where the light filtered through the trees like melted gold. At night, she'd return to her room, listen to the soft creak of the wooden walls, and drift into dreamless sleep. The weeping willow by the lake had become her sacred place. She brought a blanket and sometimes a book, but mostly she came to sit and listen. Not to anything in particular, just to the world. The gentle lap of water, the rustle of leaves, the occasional low croak of a bullfrog in the reeds. And the fox. It had no name, or at least not one Elara knew. But it returned, every few days, with its fiery red coat and curious stare. Sometimes it sat on the opposite shore, sometimes just behind her, barely visible through the brush. Elara never tried to approach it. That seemed wrong. This was its space, not hers. But she did speak to it, softly, as though telling secrets to the air. One afternoon, she sat sketching the shape of the lake in her journal. She didn't consider herself an artist, but something about trying to capture the shoreline felt like trying to learn a language that wasn't written in words. She was so focused she didn't notice the footsteps until someone cleared their throat. Chapter 2: The Lake's Secret. Days slipped by like petals on a stream. Each morning, Elara would walk to the lake, journal in hand, and sit beneath the same weeping willow tree. The stillness here was more than just the absence of sound, it was presence. A quiet that held space for thought, for memory, for healing. She met a few of the locals. Mr. Thomason, the elderly librarian with stories older than the books he guarded. Callie, the florist whose hands smelled like violets and always had a stray petal stuck in her hair. And Jonah, a reclusive artist who painted the same stretch of lake over and over, trying to capture its ever-changing moods. But her favorite companion was a fox. It appeared one morning just beyond the trees and sat watching her with calm, golden eyes. Not afraid. Not tame. Simply present. Over the next few days, it returned again and again, never coming too close, always near enough to remind her she wasn't alone. One evening, June told her a story over a slice of berry pie. They say the lake listens, she began. When someone is truly lost, it hums a song just for them. Not everyone hears it. But if you do, you'll know what it means. That night, Elara sat by the water long after sunset, listening. She heard only the wind and the faint ripple of fish below. But something deep inside her stirred. Not quite understanding, not yet. The Whispering Pines. Chapter 1: Arrival. Nestled at the edge of a vast, emerald forest and beside the glassy surface of Lake Mirasol lay the quaint village of Alderwood. It was the kind of place forgotten by time, where the air smelled of pine and lavender, and the mornings woke gently with the distant song of robins. The winding cobblestone streets were rarely busy, and the tallest building in town was a century old and named the Whispering Pines, standing like a sentinel among the wildflowers. Elara stepped off the old bus that wheezed like it had traveled through time. The quiet was the first thing she noticed, so complete that it felt almost sacred. After years of bustling cities and unrelenting noise, the silence was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. She had come to Alderwood seeking peace. A break. Maybe something more, though she wasn't sure what exactly. She carried only a small suitcase, filled more with notebooks and a few beloved novels than with clothes. Her job and marketing had drained her, and the recent end of a long relationship had left a hollow ache she couldn't quite name. She had found the village by chance while scrolling mindlessly through travel blogs late at night. A single picture of the lake at dawn had moved her in a way she couldn't explain. The innkeeper, a gentle woman named June, welcomed her with a warm smile and a plate of homemade lemon biscuits. "You'll like it here," she said, placing a cup of chamomile tea on the wooden table. "Things move slow, and the pines are good listeners." Elara smiled politely but inwardly wondered if the pine trees could indeed listen. That night, wrapped in the soft quilts of her small room, the scent of beeswax and rosemary lingering in the air, she dreamed of birds flying over mirror-still waters.